Now, the rest of the story. In the early days of the United States Post Office, mail carriers made their deliveries in some remarkable ways. Then, as now, folks complained, insisting that they could do it better themselves if given a chance. Well, once upon a time, there was a newspaper publisher named James Russell Wiggins. His paper, The American, was published in Ellsworth, Maine. Now, Jim Wiggins often sent letters through the United States Postal Service to the town of Surrey. And Surrey's only 8 miles from Ellsworth. Only 8 miles. But Jim was annoyed at what he considered the slow postal service between them. The post office record for letter delivery from Ellsworth to Surrey was 13 hours and 15 minutes. And yet, as a rule, it took anywhere from 23 to 35 hours. Imagine, for a letter to go 8 miles, 35 hours. As far as Jim Wiggins was concerned, that was simply not good enough. So he challenged the United States Post Office to a delivery duel. He, Jim, would hire his own ox cart and driver, and he would hand a letter to the driver in Ellsworth, send him off to Surrey, and then compare that delivery time with the best the post office had done. Jim enlisted the aid of farmer neighbor Walter Davis, who owned a pair of 12-year-old oxen. Walter said Jim could use the animals if he, Walter, could drive them, and it was a deal. The postal race would take place the following Friday. Well, it was a beautiful September morning that greeted the ox driver as he rode into town. As agreed, Jim Wiggins met him in front of the Ellsworth post office. The letter Davis was to deliver was from publisher Wiggins' newspaper. It was to be taken to the Jones General Store in Surrey. At 9 a.m. sharp, the four-wheeled ox cart rolled away from the post office and on down the road. A handful of citizens waved and cheered. The ox cart was gone. You see, what publisher Jim Wiggins had not counted on, however, was the gregariousness of his ox driver delivery man, Walter Davis. For as Davis encountered people on his journey, he would stop and shake hands with them and tell them about his new job. If he knew of some folks who lived a little off the path, he would detour and stop there for a visit. And there were several such visits, which makes it all the more remarkable that at 7 minutes past noon, after 3 hours and 7 minutes in transit, Walter Davis handed the letter from Ellsworth to Mr. Jones in Surrey. And he had bettered the United States Postal Service record by 10 hours and 8 minutes. Even with all that dilly-dallying along the way. Even with all of those side trips to show off for friends. Well, newspaper publisher Jim Wiggins was ecstatic. He gloated over his victory on his own front page the following day. He even proposed an alternative postal service to be called the Ox Post for efficiency-minded letter senders. No, the Ox Post never caught on. And yet Jim Wiggins declared that his Ellsworth to Surrey record of 3 hours and 7 minutes would never be beaten by the United States Post Office. And it hasn't been. I don't think I mentioned Jim Wiggins sent that letter to Surrey by ox cart, beating the nation's postal service by more than 10 hours in September of 1972, only 15 and a half years ago. But the ox cart delivery record still stands. And now you know the rest of the story.
And now for the rest of the story. 1972. Wow. I wonder if that record has been beaten yet. Well, who was James Russell Wiggins? In 1947, Jim, as Mr. Harvey called him, became editor of the Washington Post. And in 1955, he became the executive vice president of that newspaper. He worked for the Washington Post for 22 years. He served as UN ambassador in 1968 and 1969. After resigning as ambassador, Jim moved to Maine and became the editor and publisher of the Ellsworth American. Under his 25-year leadership, the Ellsworth American became, as one source claimed, one of the best small weekly newspapers in the country. It won the title of Best Weekly Newspaper in Maine numerous times. With Jim's direction, the paper's circulation nearly quadrupled. When Jim took over, there were about 3,600 subscribers, but it quickly grew to more than 12,000 subscribers. 1,500 of those were out-of-state subscribers. The Ellsworth American had subscribers in every state except North Dakota for some reason. The Ellsworth American is still going strong today. During his tenure at the Ellsworth American, Jim refrained from doing something that you and I certainly would have done. He never, not even once in 25 years, drew a salary. But what about the story of the ox cart versus the U.S. Postal Service? There's certainly more to this story. One of the first editorials Jim wrote for the Ellsworth American targeted the U.S. Postal Service. You see, the powers that be behind the Postal Service had just changed their policy, which required every piece of local mail to be sorted not by local post offices as it had been prior, but through a sorting center in Bangor, Maine. Remember, Jim sent a letter from Ellsworth to the nearby town of Surrey, a distance of only 8 miles to the southwest. Under the new policy, the letter had to travel 30 miles to the northwest to the sorting facility in Bangor. Once sorted, the letter traveled back the 30 miles to Ellsworth, then changed vehicles, and then traveled the other 8 miles southwest to Surrey. By introducing the new sorting facility policy, the number of people who had to physically touch the letter increased, and the distance it had to travel rose from 8 miles to 68 miles. In addition to the ox cart, Jim also sent letters by volunteers in canoes and on bicycles in races against the U.S. Postal Service. Most of the time, Jim's volunteers won. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And as Paul Harvey would say, good day. Can you say good day?
Yeah, good day.
Can you say good day?
Good day.